It was 2 a.m. at the McDonald's on Route 66, and Elena Reyes was the only person in the building who wasn't getting paid to sleep. Marcus, the night cook, had his headphones on in the back, half dozing over the grill. The lobby was empty. The parking lot was empty. The whole stretch of highway outside Amarillo was empty, just flat, dark Texas, and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. This was Elena's world at 2 a.m., a universe of 6 tables, a mop, and the low drone of the ice machine that everyone pretended didn't make that sound. She'd been working the overnight shift for 3 months. Before that, the day shift. Before that, a semester and a half at West Texas A&M, studying business management, dreaming about things she no longer allowed herself to dream about. The math of survival had replaced the math of ambition. And at $11.50 an hour, the math was brutally simple. Rent, medications, groceries, gas. Anything left over went into a coffee can on top of the fridge. The coffee can hadn't grown in months. Elena wiped down table 14. It was already clean. She wiped it again anyway because standing still at 2 a.m. made the exhaustion worse, and she still had 4 hours left on her shift. That's when she saw him. He was outside the glass doors, sitting in a wheelchair with duct tape around the armrests and one footrest missing entirely. He wore a gray hoodie with the hood up, and he was staring at the backlit menu board above the drive-thru the way some people stare at things they know they can't have. Elena watched him for a full minute. He didn't come in, didn't pull out a phone, just sat there reading prices he couldn't afford. She pushed through the front door. "Are you all right? We're open. There's air conditioning inside." He looked up, younger than she'd expected. Late 20s, stubble that had crossed from intentional to neglected. Blue eyes ringed with dark circles. "I don't have any money," he said. Not with shame, just fact. Elena went back inside, took the employee meal she'd been saving for her 3 a.m. break, a Big Mac, fries, and a Coke, set it on a tray with extra ketchup, and on a napkin wrote, "Nobody should be hungry at 2 a.m. Sleep well tonight." She carried it out and set it on the concrete ledge beside him, low enough that he wouldn't have to reach. It was her mother's habit. Lucia Reyes, who'd worked double shifts at a laundromat in Amarillo and still found a way to cook extra rice for the neighbor kids, used to say, "When someone is hungry, you don't ask questions. You just feed them. Questions are for people with full stomachs." Elena had been 14 when Lucia died. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed 8 months before it killed her because the free clinic in Amarillo had a 6-month waiting list. And Lucia was not the kind of woman who complained about pain until the pain had already won. Elena had watched her mother shrink in that hospital bed the way a candle shrinks, still giving light, still warm, but less of her every day. The last thing Lucia said to her was, "Take care of your father. He's stronger than he thinks, but more fragile than he knows." Elena had been taking care of Diego ever since. She dropped out of West Texas A&M, 18 credits short of her degree, because Diego's back gave out and someone had to pay the rent. She'd taken the McDonald's overnight shift because it paid $1.25 more than the day shift and came with a free meal. She'd built her life around the mathematics of survival. Rent, medication, groceries, gas, in that order, always in that order. Anything left over went into a coffee can on top of the fridge that she called someday money. And that never seemed to grow. So when she gave her employee meal to a stranger in a wheelchair at 2 a.m., it wasn't generosity in the way rich people understand generosity. The painless kind. The kind that comes with tax deductions. It was the real kind, the kind that costs. The man stared at the food, then at the napkin. His hand trembled slightly. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Something between bewilderment and a pain so old it had forgotten its own name. Then he ate. Elena went back to wiping tables. When she looked up again, he was gone. The tray was perfectly clean, every crumb gone, the ketchup packets folded and stacked. A small gesture that told her more about him than any conversation could. She noticed one other thing. At the far edge of the parking lot, barely visible in the dark, sat 2 vehicles that had no business being at a McDonald's in Amarillo at 2 a.m. A black Range Rover and a pearl white Mercedes G-Wagon. Both had Texas plates, both had tinted windows, and the man in the wheelchair had not looked at them once. Elena got home at 7 a.m. The house on Delmar Street was small, built in the 60s with aluminum siding that had stopped pretending to be white and a screen door held shut by a bungee cord. Her father, Diego, was on the porch. He was always on the porch on mornings. His back let him get out of bed. Plastic lawn chair, instant coffee, reading glasses on a nose that had been broken twice. "Morning, mija. How was work?" "Slow." Elena set an envelope on his armrest. "This week's check." Diego picked it up and set it back down. "Keep it. Go back to school." They'd had this conversation 50 times. It always ended the same way. "Your prescription is 3 months overdue, Pa. Mariana Gutierrez has been telling me. I'm dying since I was 40. I'm still here." He smiled. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "Go sleep, mija." Elena kissed the top of his head and went inside. In the hallway, she paused in front of the small wooden shelf that held her mother's things. A wedding photo, a ceramic virgin, and a metal box the size of a thick paperback. The box had a keyhole. Elena didn't have the key. She'd asked about it once, the night of Lucia's funeral 8 years ago. Diego had said, "This was your mother's. She told me to keep it until the right time. When the key comes, you'll know." Elena touched the box the way she always did, a small ritual, and went to bed. He came back the next night. Same time, same wheelchair. But this time he wheeled himself inside and settled into the corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that no customer ever chose. Elena brought him a tray without being asked. Big Mac, fries, Coke, her employee meal again. She'd grabbed a granola bar at the gas station on her way in, told herself it was enough. On the napkin, "I noticed you like the fries more than the burger. Extra fries today." He read the napkin, and for the first time he smiled. Small, barely there, but it changed his face the way sunlight changes a room when someone opens the curtains. "I'm Nathan." "Elena, but everyone here calls me Lena." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "Thank you for last night, too." "It's just a burger." "No, it's not." Something in the way he said it made Elena stop. He wasn't being dramatic, he was being precise. He came back the next night and the next and the next. For 2 weeks, Nathan appeared at the same time, sat in the same booth, and Elena brought him the same meal. Their conversations grew slowly, the way desert plants grow in soil that doesn't forgive mistakes, but with roots deeper than you'd guess. The first few nights, they barely spoke. Nathan would eat. Elena would wipe tables nearby. And every so often, one of them would say something that landed softly in the quiet. "You always work this shift?" Nathan asked on the third night. "Someone has to." "Doesn't it get lonely?" Elena shrugged. Lonely is just a word people use when they run out of things to distract themselves with. At 2 a.m., there's nothing to hide behind. I kind of like that. Nathan looked at her as if she'd said something he'd been thinking for years, but couldn't put into words. By the 5th night, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Elena would bring his food, sit across from him for her break, and they'd talk the way people talk when neither one is trying to impress the other. Loosely, honestly, with the pauses left in. Elena learned that Nathan was traveling Route 66. He was vague about where he'd started and vaguer about where he was going. "I'm trying to find where the road ends," he said. And Elena didn't press because she understood that some questions are really statements. Nathan learned that Elena had been 18 credits short of a business degree when her mother got sick, that she made $11.50 an hour, that she sent most of her paycheck to her father's medications, that she read business articles on her phone during breaks the way other people read novels, hungrily studying a world she hadn't been invited to enter. "What would you study if you went back?" Nathan asked one night. "Business management." "Why?" "Because I've been managing things my whole life. A household, a budget, my dad's doctor appointments. I just don't have the piece of paper that says I know how." Nathan smiled. "You know, most people I've met with that piece of paper couldn't manage a grocery list." "Most people you've met don't have to manage a grocery list." He laughed. It was quiet, almost surprised, as if laughing was something he'd forgotten he could do. On the 8th night, Elena noticed something. Nathan always parked his wheelchair so that his back was to the window. She'd assumed it was habit, but that night, as she refilled his Coke, she caught him glancing at the glass, not at the parking lot, but at his own reflection. The look lasted maybe 2 seconds. It was the look of a man who still hadn't made peace with what he saw. She sat down across from him. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You've been feeding me for a week. I think we're past small talk. What did you do before the chair?" Nathan's fingers tapped the table. "I was a lot of things. None of them mattered as much as I thought they did." "That's not an answer." It's the only one I've got right now. Elena nodded. She'd learned from years with Diego that pushing people past their limit didn't open doors. It locked them. But 2 nights later, unprompted, Nathan said, I used to run before the accident. Marathons. I did the Boston Marathon twice. He looked down at his legs. Now I can't feel anything below the knee on most days. I'm sorry. Don't be. Running was just moving fast to avoid standing still. I'm better at standing still now, he paused. That came out more philosophical than I intended. Elena smiled. For a guy who lives in a wheelchair, you're pretty good at getting somewhere. Nathan looked at her, and for a moment, the careful distance he maintained with everyone, the easy deflection, the practiced humor dropped. You're the first person who talks to me like I'm just a person, not a tragedy. You're not a tragedy, Elena said. You're a guy who likes extra fries. He laughed again. The surprise in it was fading. He was remembering how. One night, Elena asked the question she'd been avoiding. How long ago was the accident? Nathan's hands stilled on the table. 3 years. Then quieter. But honestly, my legs stopped working that day. I only actually died the day the people closest to me started looking at me like something to be pitied. Elena felt it, not in the air, in her chest. I understand my mom died when I was 14. For 8 years, everyone's looked at me with that face, the head tilt, the soft voice. I hate that look more than I hate the grief. Nathan held her gaze under fluorescent lights, surrounded by the smell of old fryer oil and the hum of the interstate. Two people who'd learned to carry their pain alone recognized the same wound in each other. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something more dangerous. It was being understood. Another night, the second week was ending. Do you ever wonder how different your life would be if one small thing changed? Nathan asked. Elena laughed softly. Every day. If my mom hadn't gotten sick, I'd be in a lecture hall right now. Nathan looked at his hands. If I weren't in this chair, I never would have stopped here. And I never would have met you. Neither of them said anything after that. Some silences are heavy. This one was light. The next night, Nathan asked about Diego. Your dad, the one who raised you, what's he like? Elena thought about it. He's the kind of man who sets his alarm for 5 a.m., even though he has nowhere to go because he says a man who sleeps in has given up. He reads the newspaper cover to cover, even though it's 3 days old because we can't afford a subscription. He tells the same 4 jokes and laughs at all of them like it's the first time. She smiled. He's in pain every day. His back is ruined from 30 years on oil rigs, but he never complains. He just sits on the porch and watches the sunrise like it's doing him a personal favor. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He sounds like a good man. He is. He's the best man I know. That's a big thing to say. It's an accurate thing to say. There's a difference. Nathan looked at her, and there it was again, that expression she'd first seen in the parking lot. Not pity, not admiration, something closer to recognition, like he was looking at someone he'd been searching for without knowing what they looked like. What about your father? Elena asked. Nathan's face changed, not dramatically, just a slight tightening around the eyes, the way a window closes when the wind shifts. Complicated. Complicated how? Complicated like he's the most powerful person in every room he enters and the most helpless person in his own house. Elena heard something in that sentence that Nathan probably didn't intend to reveal. She filed it away the way she filed away everything, carefully for later. It was on the 11th night that Elena finally asked about the cars. Nathan, the parking lot. Every night you're here, there are 2 cars at the far end, Range Rover and a G-Wagon. When you leave, they leave. Nathan's jaw tightened. He stared at the table for a long time. They're not mine, he said. I didn't say they were. They belong to someone who thinks he's looking out for me. But looking out for and keeping tabs on are 2 different things. Who? Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he said, Do you trust me, Lena? It was the first time anyone had asked her that in years. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered all serious things, slowly, honestly, without performance. I don't know you well enough to trust you, she said, but I know you well enough to keep feeding you. Nathan almost smiled. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in a long time. I don't know how to be anything else. I know, he said, and that's why. He didn't finish the sentence, but Elena heard the word anyway. The word he hadn't said, the word that hung in the air between a McDonald's counter and a duct-taped wheelchair at 2 a.m. Unspoken but unmistakable. On the last night of the second week, Nathan came in later than usual. Something was different about him, an urgency Elena couldn't name. He ate in silence. When he finished, he placed something on the table next to the folded napkin, a small silver key, old and tarnished, with a single letter engraved on it, C. Next to it, a note. Thank you, Elena. You're the first person in 3 years who didn't ask me what I needed. You just gave me what you had. Elena picked up the key. It was warm from his pocket. The letter C was worn smooth as if someone had rubbed it with their thumb over many years. She looked up. Nathan was already wheeling toward the door. Nathan, wait. He paused but didn't turn around. You'll know when it opens. Then he was gone. Elena ran to the door. The parking lot was empty. No wheelchair, no Range Rover, no Mercedes. Just the flat, dark Texas night and the sound of nothing. That's when it hit her. The letter C, she'd seen it before. Same script on a silver bracelet inside a metal box she'd never been able to open. Elena drove home faster than she should have. Diego was asleep. She lifted the box from the shelf, carried it to the kitchen table, and inserted the key. It fit perfectly. Inside, a handwritten letter on yellowed paper, a silver bracelet engraved with C, and a photograph. In the photo, a young Lucia, barely 20, impossibly beautiful, stood beside a tall man in a white shirt with rolled sleeves. They were both laughing, squinting against the sun. Behind them, an oil derrick rose against a cloudless sky. Elena unfolded the letter. Her hands shook. Elena, my love, if you're reading this, then the key has found its way to you. Your real father's name is Richard Calloway. I left him before you were born because I wanted you to know the value of what you earn, not what you inherit. I never took his money, but you have the right to know who you are. Whatever you choose, know that I chose Diego. He is your father in every way that matters. With all my love, Mama. Elena sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Mija. Diego stood in the doorway. His face was already crumbling because he could see the open box. How long have you known? Elena whispered. Diego lowered himself into the chair across from her. Since before you were born. Your mama told me everything before she agreed to marry me. She said I had to know. She said it was only fair. He looked at the photograph of Lucia and Richard. His face held no jealousy, only the tired tenderness of a man who'd spent 2 decades loving a woman who'd loved someone else first, and who had never once treated that as a wound because Lucia had chosen him. And that choice was worth more than being first. She said, Diego, that man can give her everything in the world, but I want her to learn that everything in the world isn't worth as much as one person who shows up. His voice broke. And she chose me because I show up every day. That's all I know how to do. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Rough, scarred, the hand of a man who'd worked himself broken so his daughter wouldn't have to. You're my father, she said. Diego's chin trembled. Always. But I need to find out who this man is and why Nathan had Mama's key. Diego nodded. Then you go find out. He squeezed her hand. But you come home, Elena. You always come home. Always, Pa. She packed a bag that night. It didn't take long. When you own 3 pairs of jeans and 4 t-shirts, packing is less a process than a decision. She put the photograph of Lucia and Richard in the side pocket wrapped in a dish towel so the glass wouldn't crack. Diego sat in the kitchen while she packed, drinking coffee that had gone cold, not speaking. When she came out with her bag, he was holding something, a small wooden cross on a leather cord. Lucia, your mama, wore this the day I married her, he said. She said it would protect whoever needed it most. He held it out. I think that's you right now. Elena took it. She put it around her neck next to the bracelet on her wrist. 2 pieces of her mother touching her skin. What if he's a bad man? Diego considered this. Your mama was a lot of things, but she was never wrong about people. If she loved him once, there was a reason. Go find out what it was. Elena kissed his forehead. She smelled coffee and menthol, and the particular scent of a man who has spent his life outdoors and never quite shakes the sun from his skin. She picked up her bag and walked to the car. In the rearview mirror, Diego stood on the porch, one hand raised. He held it there until she turned the corner and couldn't see him anymore. She knew because she checked. 3 days later, Elena sat on her bed, searching a name she'd never heard before. Richard Calloway. Calloway Petroleum, $4.2 billion. Houston. Built the company from a single lease in the Permian Basin and buried in a 3-year-old Houston Chronicle article. Calloway Air withdraws from public life after accident. Nathan Calloway, 25, the only son of petroleum magnate Richard Calloway, has not been seen publicly since a single vehicle accident that left him with severe spinal injuries. Elena stared at the screen. Nathan Calloway, the man she'd been feeding her employee meals for 2 weeks, was the son of a billionaire. A billionaire who might be her father, which meant Nathan could be her brother. The anger came first, then confusion, then fear that everything she'd felt had been manufactured. She was still sitting with that fear when a black sedan pulled up outside the house. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. "My name is Robert Harmon. I'm the personal attorney for Richard Calloway. Mr. Calloway is requesting a meeting with his daughter." Diego looked at Elena. "That's not my decision, it's hers." "Why should I go?" Elena asked. "Mr. Calloway is terminally ill, pancreatic cancer, and there's a matter of a will that concerns you directly." The next morning, Elena was on an airplane for the first time in her life. Window seat. She watched Texas unfold below. The patchwork of brown and green, the silver threads of rivers, the grids of cities she'd never visited. The woman next to her, a businesswoman in a cream blazer, glanced at Elena's outfit and moved her bag to the other side of her seat, a gesture so small and automatic she probably wasn't aware she'd done it. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool window and thought about what she was flying toward. A dying man she'd never met, a truth her mother had hidden for 22 years, a life that existed parallel to hers, separated by money and secrets, and a promise made between people who'd loved each other enough to let go. She thought about Diego alone on the porch with his instant coffee. She thought about Lucia, who'd worked herself to death rather than accept $1 from a billionaire. She thought about the metal box now open on the kitchen table, its secrets finally free. And she thought about Nathan, the man who'd eaten her food and read her napkins, and looked at her with eyes that held a pain she recognized. Nathan, who had known everything and said nothing, who had let her be kind to him under false pretenses. She didn't know what to feel about that. So she felt all of it at once, anger and understanding and something else, something that didn't have a name yet, something that had started in a parking lot at 2 a.m. and refused to stop growing no matter how much she told it to. The Calloway estate in River Oaks sat behind wrought iron gates on 12 acres. Elena walked through the front door in her cleanest jeans and a white t-shirt, wearing her mother's bracelet, and felt every molecule of her body say she didn't belong here. The floors were Italian marble. The paintings on the walls were real, not prints, not reproductions, but actual paintings by people whose names Elena had seen in textbooks. A woman in a pressed gray uniform offered her sparkling water on a silver tray, and Elena almost laughed. 12 hours ago, she'd been mopping the floor of a fast food restaurant. Robert Harmon led her through a hallway lined with photographs. Elena slowed at one, a framed picture of a young woman playing a guitar on a porch, dark hair falling across her face, laughing at whoever held the camera. The woman was unmistakably Lucia. Elena's feet stopped, moving before she decided to stop. She stared at the photograph, her mother in this house, her mother in a frame on a billionaire's wall decades before Elena existed. Harmon noticed. "Mr. Calloway kept that photograph in his office for 30 years, he said quietly. "He moved it to the hallway last month. He said he wanted it to be the first thing you saw." Elena touched the glass the way she touched the metal box at home. Then she kept walking. Richard Calloway sat in a wheelchair in the sunroom. The cancer had made him small, 71 and gaunt, but his eyes were sharp and blue, the same blue she'd seen in a McDonald's parking lot 2 weeks ago. "You look just like her," Richard said, and his voice cracked on the last word. Elena did not sit down. "You knew my mother was sick. You knew I dropped out. You knew I was working the overnight shift at McDonald's. And in 22 years, you never showed up." Richard took the words the way a man takes a blow he's been expecting. "Your mother was the proudest woman I ever knew. She told me, if you give that child a single dollar, I'll consider you dead. She wanted you to grow up knowing the value of what you earn, not what you inherit. And you just listened? No, I fought her for months. I begged. I sent lawyers. I sent letters. She returned every one unopened." Richard's hands gripped his armrests. "When she wouldn't budge, I became invisible. The anonymous scholarship that almost covered your tuition before Lucia got sick, that was me. The house Diego lives in, I bought it through a trust under a stranger's name. The clinic that fast-tracked her oncology referral," he stopped. "Everything I did had to be invisible because the moment Lucia found out, she would have moved you to another state, and I'd have lost even the shadow of a connection. You could have fought harder. I could have, And I would have destroyed the one thing Lucia valued above all else, the right to raise her daughter her way. I loved your mother, Elena, enough to let her win. Elena stood very still. Her mother had not been abandoned. Her mother had chosen, and this man had loved her enough to obey a decree that must have felt like losing a limb. Did she know you were watching? Elena asked. At the end, yes. Richard's voice dropped. 3 weeks before she died, Lucia called me. First time in 21 years. She said, I know about the house, I know about the scholarship, and I know about the clinic. He closed his eyes. I thought she was going to curse me out. Instead, she said, thank you for doing it my way. And then she told me about the key. She said, but when I'm gone, wait. Wait until Elena is old enough to handle the truth and then give her the choice I never let her have. Elena felt something crack inside her chest, not break, crack, the way frozen ground cracks in spring. Not from destruction, but from something underneath finally pushing through. She sent you the key with a letter she wrote. My daughter has Diego's kindness and my stubbornness. When the time comes, she'll know what to do with both. Elena looked down at the bracelet on her wrist. The sea caught the light from the sunroom windows. Why send Nathan, she asked. Because I'm dying, and I wanted my son to know who you were before I changed the will. I didn't want him to meet a name in a document. I wanted him to meet the person. Elena asked it anyway. So Nathan is my brother? Richard shook his head. Nathan is my son from my marriage to Margaret. You and Nathan share no blood. The room tilted. Elena grabbed the back of the chair she'd refused to sit in. Richard had rewritten his will. Callaway Petroleum, 51% to Elena, 49% to Nathan. The condition? Elena had to spend 6 months working inside the company, starting at the bottom. If she refused or failed, everything went to Garrett Shaw, Richard's nephew, current COO. Why me? Elena said. I've never been inside a corporate office. I can't read a balance sheet. I make $11.50 an hour. Because you gave a stranger your last meal at 2 a.m. without knowing his name, Richard said. Because you wrote him a note that said nobody should be hungry. Because you did it when you had nothing and you didn't calculate the return. He leaned forward. The best leaders don't come from business schools, Elena. They come from kitchens where there's not enough food and someone still finds a way to feed everyone. Before Elena could respond, the sunroom door opened and a man walked in, 53, tanned, silver-haired, wearing the kind of confidence that comes from holding power so long, you confuse it with identity. Garrett Shaw. He carried a leather portfolio and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He glanced at Elena the way you glance at furniture. Richard, Robert said you had a guest. Garrett, this is Elena Reyes. Shaw's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A recalculation. Fast. The kind of adjustment a predator makes when the landscape shifts. He shook Elena's hand. His grip was firm and brief, the handshake of a man who measured people the way he measured quarterly earnings. Quickly and without sentiment. Welcome to Houston. 3 hours later, Elena walked through the lobby of Callaway Petroleum for the first time. Garrett was waiting by the elevator. Let me be direct, he said, his voice low and pleasant. Absolutely lethal. You know nothing about petroleum, nothing about supply chains, nothing about finance. You know how to make hamburgers, and now you want to run a $4 billion empire. Elena looked at him. 200 employees moved through the lobby behind her. All more qualified, all wearing clothes that cost more than her car. I know the difference between someone who's actually hungry and someone who's pretending, she said. That's not something they teach at business school. Garrett's smile didn't waver, but his eyes did. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his face that Elena recognized. The same expression she'd seen on the faces of customers who tried to shortchange the register and realized they had been caught. Not shame, recalculation. Careful, Miss Reyes, he said pleasantly. This isn't a kitchen. The stakes are considerably higher. The stakes are always high when people are hungry, Elena replied. The only thing that changes is what they're hungry for. She walked past him into the elevator. The doors closed. In the mirrored wall, she caught her own reflection. White t-shirt, jeans, her mother's bracelet, her mother's cross. She looked exactly like what she was, a girl from Amarillo who had no business being in this building. But she was here, and she wasn't leaving. Elena Reyes, employee number 742, pressed the button for the 4th floor and began the longest 6 months of her life. She found Nathan in the garden of the Callaway estate on her 3rd day, Wheelchair between the rose beds, book in his lap. He wasn't reading. You knew, Elena said. You knew who I was the whole time. Yes. Was any of it real? The no money, Route 66? Nathan looked at her. My father sent me to find you. That's true. But the accident is real. The wheelchair is real. I left my father's house 3 years ago and haven't been back until now. I've been living out of motels using cash so he couldn't track me. The cars you saw, his security team, they followed me the whole time without my permission. And the money, I have a trust fund I haven't touched in 3 years. I really didn't have cash that night. Lena, I wanted to know what it felt like to be invisible. To not be Nathan Calloway, oil prince, just some guy in a wheelchair nobody sees. You have no idea what invisible actually feels like. You're right, I don't. But I was looking for it and instead I found someone who saw me when I was trying to disappear. He paused. My father asked me to observe you, report back on your character, but I need you to know what I said about meeting you being the only good thing my wheelchair ever gave me. That was real. My father didn't ask me to feel anything for you. I managed that on my own. Elena studied his face for a long time. The key, how did you have it? Your mother sent it to my father before she died with a message. When the time is right, give it back to my daughter. He kept it 8 years. When the cancer came, he gave it to me and said, find her, let her open it, bring her home. This isn't my home. No, but maybe it's where you find out who you are. Elena stared at him. The rose beds smelled sweet. Somewhere inside the house, someone was playing piano. The notes drifted through an open window like a memory of someone else's life. You know what the worst part is, Elena said? It's not that you lied. It's that you were the first person in years who made me feel like I wasn't invisible. And now I don't know if that was real or if it was an assignment. Nathan's jaw tightened. The assignment was to find you. The assignment was to report back. Everything else, the conversations, the fries, the night you told me about your mom, none of that was in the job description. He wheeled his chair slightly closer. You want to know the truth? I was supposed to spend 3 days, enough to get a read on your character. I stayed 2 weeks because I couldn't make myself leave. Why not? Because at 2 a.m. in a McDonald's in Amarillo, Texas, a woman with $11 in her bank account gave me the only food she had, and then she wrote me a note like I mattered. Like I was a person, not a problem. His voice roughened. Do you know how long it had been since someone treated me like that? Elena didn't answer, but she sat down in the garden chair next to his wheelchair. Not close, but not far. If we do this, she said, the company, the will, all of it, I need to know that when you look at me, you see Lena, not Elena Calloway, not the girl in the will. Lena. Lena, Nathan said, is the only person I've seen in 3 years. Elena didn't answer, but she didn't leave. The first 2 months were an education in humiliation. Garrett placed Elena in internal audit, the department where the company buried its math. Her first day, a senior auditor named Patricia Kwan dropped a 3-inch binder on her desk and said, flag anything that doesn't match the vendor list. Due Thursday. Then she walked away. Elena opened the binder, 14 columns, font so small she had to squint. She understood 4 of the headers. She closed the binder, went to the restroom, pressed her forehead against the stall door for 60 seconds. Then she went back and opened it again. Nobody invited her to lunch. Nobody explained the coffee machine. She ate in the stairwell, reading audit reports with one hand and Googling every term she didn't know with the other. She called Diego at midnight. Pa, do you know what EBITDA means? Diego laughed. I only know ABCD, mija, but I believe in you. By the 3rd week, Elena's desk was covered in sticky notes with definitions she'd written herself. Gross margin, net operating loss, working capital. She color-coded them, yellow for terms she understood, blue for terms she was still working on, pink for terms that made no sense at all. The pink notes outnumbered the others 3-1. Patricia Kwan walked past her desk one morning, paused, and looked at the sticky notes. She didn't say anything, but the next day there was a glossary of accounting terms on Elena's desk with a post-it that read, "This might help. PQ." It was the first act of kindness Elena had received in the building. She kept the post-it. The hardest part wasn't the work. The work was learnable, brutal, slow, humbling, but learnable. The hardest part was the way people looked at her. or rather the way they didn't. She'd walk into the break room and conversations would stop. She'd sit in a meeting and no one would explain the context. She existed in the company the way background music exists in a restaurant, present but deliberately ignored. One afternoon, she overheard two analysts in the elevator. That's her, the McDonald's girl, apparently Calloway's secret daughter. Can you imagine? 6 months ago, she was flipping burgers, and now she's going to run the company. America, right? The elevator doors opened. Elena stepped out. She didn't look at them. That night, she sat on the floor of her apartment and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. She and Nathan talked every night. He'd started physical therapy again, something he'd abandoned 2 years ago. The therapist makes me do leg extensions, he said. 20 reps. I can do 4. 4 is progress. Doesn't feel like it. That's how you know it's real. A pause. Then Nathan said, you know why I started again? Why? Because you make me want to stand up. In every sense. Elena pressed the phone to her ear and said nothing. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be received. The calls became their anchor. Every night at 11, Elena's phone would ring, and for an hour, the distance between Houston and wherever Nathan was doing his therapy would collapse into two voices in the dark. They talked about small things. The vending machine on the 4th floor that ate quarters. The fact that Marcus at McDonald's had texted Elena asking when she was coming back because the new night person didn't wipe the tables right. The physical therapist, Nathan called Sergeant Payne, who told him she'd seen tougher patients. And Nathan said, name one, and she said, an 80-year-old grandmother from Galveston who did double your reps. And Nathan had been furious and then done double his reps the next day. They talked about big things too, about what it means to inherit something you didn't build, about whether money changes people or just reveals them, about Lucia and Richard and Diego, the triangle of love and loss and pride that had created Elena's entire life without her knowing. One night, very late, Nathan said, do you ever wish she'd taken the money? Your mom? Elena thought about it for a long time. She thought about the scholarship that had almost been enough, the clinic that had fast-tracked Lucia's referrals 6 months too late, the house on Delmar Street that belonged to Diego only because a billionaire had bought it in secret and put it in a stranger's name. No, she said, because if she had, I'd have grown up thinking the world owes you something. Instead, I grew up knowing you have to earn it. And that's why I can sit in this apartment and study EBITDA at midnight instead of giving up. So you're grateful she chose poverty? I'm grateful she chose character. Poverty was the side effect. Nathan was quiet then. Your mother was the bravest person in this whole story. You know that, right? I know, she always was. Another night, 3 weeks in, Nathan asked, how are the people there? Polite. That bad, huh? Elena almost laughed. How'd you know? Because polite is what people are when they've decided you don't matter enough to be rude to. I grew up around polite. It's the most violent thing rich people do. That's surprisingly accurate. I had 28 years of field research. Elena smiled in the dark of her apartment. The smile surprised her. She'd forgotten she could still do it on command. Nathan? Yeah? Thank you for answering the phone. Always, Lena. Month 3, Elena found a series of transportation contracts with a company called Sovereign Logistics, crude oil transport from Callaway's wells to Port Arthur refineries. Standard work, but the pricing was off. 18% above market, consistently across 37 contracts over 5 years. Elena pulled the registration records. Sovereign Logistics, strip mall office in Midland. Principal shareholder, Victoria Shaw, Garrett Shaw's wife. 38 million skimmed over 5 years through inflated contracts, funneled into a shell company controlled by the man who wanted to inherit everything. Elena sat at her desk after hours, the office empty, the Houston skyline glittering through the window. She stared at the numbers, then photocopied every page, put them in a brown paper bag from the break room. The irony of using a fast food bag wasn't lost on her, and carried them home under her arm. She told Nathan that night. The line went quiet for so long, Elena checked to see if the call had dropped. Garrett is my mother's nephew, Nathan said finally. His voice had gone flat. He taught me to ride a bike. He was at my high school graduation. He visited me in the hospital every day the first week after the accident. Every day, Lena, he sat in that room and held my hand and told me it would be okay. I know, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, be right. He took a breath. 38 million. While my father was dying, while I was in a wheelchair, while you were working the night shift for $11.50 an hour. 38 million. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Wait, if we move now, he destroys the evidence. I'm a 22-year-old McDonald's employee accusing the COO of a $4 billion company. Who does the board believe? Nathan was quiet, then, my father sent me to find you because he thought you deserved the inheritance. Elena braced. He was wrong. The words hit like a slap. Elena closed her eyes. You don't just deserve to inherit it. You deserve to run it. And anyone who can find 38 million hidden in vendor contracts after 6 months in an audit cubicle. He paused. You don't need a business degree, Lena. You need a boardroom. The first sentence hurt. Elena said, I know. I was saving the second one for the landing. She almost laughed. You rehearsed that all week. She did laugh then, and the sound surprised her. It had been weeks. Month 4, Garrett's move. He assigned Elena to manage a failing pump station in San Angelo. Gutted budget, skeleton crew, equipment that belonged in a museum. It looked like a promotion. It was designed to fail. Elena drove 3 hours to get there. The station was exactly as bad as advertised. Rusted pipes, 11 men who'd been told for a year they were being shut down. Their foreman, Ray Gutierrez, met her at the gate. With all due respect, Ray said, and the phrase carried no respect at all. They sent us a kid from accounting who's never set foot on a rig. What exactly are you going to do? Elena didn't give a speech. She put on coveralls, climbed down to the pump floor, and said, show me everything that's broken and tell me what it costs. Ray stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, you're the first person from Houston who's ever asked to see it instead of telling us what it is. He showed her everything, the rusted valves, the generator that ran on prayer, the electrical panel with a handwritten sign that said, do not touch. This means you, Gary. He showed her the break room, which was a repurposed shipping container with a microwave and a coffee maker that produced something closer to motor oil than coffee. Elena spent 3 days watching and listening. She didn't give opinions. She didn't suggest improvements. She asked questions. On the 4th day, she sat with Ray in his corner of the container and said, tell me every expense you think is wasted and every idea you've had that nobody in Houston listened to. Ray reached into a drawer, pulled out a notebook, dog-eared, coffee-stained, 3 years of handwritten notes, and said, you're the first person from corporate who's ever asked me to sit down before talking. They went through this notebook together. Elena recognized the patterns. A vendor contract, 4 years old and never renegotiated. $40,000 above current price. Automated reports nobody read. Burning ink and hours. An overtime schedule designed by someone in Houston who'd never seen San Angelo, paying premium for shifts that didn't need them. She renegotiated the contract herself, calling the supplier directly. She cut the reports. She redesigned the schedule the same way she'd covered shifts at McDonald's. Put the right people in the right place. Trust them to know their job. She didn't pretend to understand petroleum. She was the person who looked at money the way a mother looks at food, accounting for every unit, wasting nothing. Because when you've been poor, truly poor, you develop a relationship with numbers that people who've always had enough can never replicate. By month 5, San Angelo posted its first profit in 3 years. The crew called her Ms. Lena. Ray told his wife he was staying on. The new boss, he said, is the first person from Houston who ever got her boots dirty. Month 5. Richard Calloway died on a Thursday morning in his sleep in the sunroom where Elena had first met him. Nathan called at 6 a.m. His voice was too steady, the way voices get when any variation might crack the dam. He's gone. Elena didn't ask how. She didn't say, I'm sorry for your loss, because she'd heard that phrase enough times after Lucia died to know it landed like cotton on a wound that needed air. I'm coming, she said. She flew to Houston that afternoon. She found Nathan in the garden in his wheelchair, positioned next to the iron garden chair where Richard used to sit. The chair was empty. The cushion still held the impression of the man who'd never sit in it again. Elena sat beside Nathan. They didn't talk for an hour. The sprinklers ran, birds sang. The world continued the way it always does after someone leaves it, with terrible normalcy. Finally, Nathan said, he asked about you last night. He wanted to know if you'd found the discrepancy in the logistics contracts. What did you tell him? That you'd found it weeks ago and were waiting for the right moment. Nathan looked at the empty chair. He smiled. It was the last time Elena saw him smile. Another silence. Then Nathan said, he told me something else. He said, that girl has her mother's fire and Diego's patience. She'll need both. Elena looked at the garden. She thought about a man who'd loved her mother enough to become invisible, who'd watched his daughter grow up from the shadows, paying bills under false names, keeping promises that must have felt like slow drowning. Was he a good father, she asked. To you? Nathan thought for a long time. He was a good man who was a complicated father. He loved me. He didn't always know how to show it. After my accident, he tried to fix me the way he fixed it in everything, with money and specialists and control. I left because I couldn't breathe under it. He paused. But he was trying. I know that now. He was always trying. That sounds familiar, Elena said. What does? A father who loves his child but doesn't know how to say it. I have one of those too. Nathan looked at her, and something passed between them that didn't need words. The understanding that they were both children of imperfect men who had loved them in imperfect ways, and that imperfect love, when it's genuine, is still love. The day before he died, Richard had called Elena to his bedside. His voice was a whisper, but his eyes were clear. You don't need to prove anything to me, he said. You only need to prove to yourself that you're worthy. And you've been worthy since the night you gave a stranger your last meal. He'd given her a sealed envelope. Inside, Elena, I don't have the right to call you my daughter, but I have the right to say I'm proud of you. Not because you carry the Calloway name, because you carry Lucia's heart. The bracelet, the C, doesn't stand for Calloway. Your mother said it stood for courage, courage in Spanish. She always wanted you to be brave. You already are. Below, in handwriting so shaky it was barely legible. Tell Diego I said thank you. He was the better man, I always knew. And at the very bottom, one more line. The scholarship, the house, the clinic, none of it was enough. The only thing that would have been enough was being there. I wasn't, forgive me. Elena wept for herself, for the girl who'd spent 8 years believing she'd been left behind by a man who didn't care, only to learn that he'd been standing in the shadows the whole time, close enough to see her, but forbidden to speak. She folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and slipped it inside her bag, next to the wooden cross Diego had given her. 2 pieces of 2 fathers, both imperfect, both trying. Garrett didn't waste time on grief. 3 days after the funeral, he called an emergency board session. His argument? Richard wrote the will while on high-dose pain medication. Mental competency was questionable. The beneficiary was a 22-year-old with no degree, no experience, and no prior relationship with the company. The decision was illness, not judgment. He filed a motion to freeze the will. If granted, the previous version, naming Garrett as heir, would take effect. It was a smart move, legally sound. The implication was clear. The dying wish of a father who'd spent 22 years watching his daughter from the shadows was being reduced to a medication side effect. A decision made by a mind that wasn't working right. Elena read the legal filing in her apartment that night. Every page, every argument. When she finished, she set it on the counter and stood very still. She wasn't angry. She'd been angry before. She was past anger. What she felt was colder and more useful. Clarity, the diamond-hard clarity of a person who knows exactly what needs to be done. She looked at the brown paper bag on her kitchen table, the one with the sovereign logistics documents. She'd been waiting for the right moment. The moment had arrived. Then he made sure Elena's background leaked. He didn't do it himself. He mentioned it to his assistant, who told HR, who told a department head, and within a week, every employee knew the new girl in audit was the founder's secret daughter, a McDonald's worker from Amarillo who'd never finished college. The whispers were predictable. Gold digger, con artist, lucky little grifter. The worst one Elena overheard was in the bathroom. 2 women she'd never spoken to. Imagine flipping burgers one day, billionaire the next. All you have to do is exist and wait for daddy's check. Elena stayed in the stall until they left. Then she pressed her palms flat against the tile wall until the shaking stopped. The cruelty wasn't in the words. It was in the assumption that she hadn't earned anything, that her entire life of sacrifice had been preparation for a handout. They didn't know about the 16-hour days, the spreadsheets, San Angelo, the $340,000 she'd pulled from a station everyone had given up on. They saw a girl from nowhere and decided she was nothing. Elena ate lunch in the stairwell and pretended the isolation didn't cut. She called Nathan at midnight. I want to quit. I don't belong in this world. Nathan was quiet for a long time. She could hear him breathing. Then the faint sound of movement. He was adjusting himself in his wheelchair the way he did when he was thinking carefully. You know what my first memory of this world is, he said. I was 6. My father took me to a company Christmas party. 200 people in suits. Someone bent down and said, "You must be so proud of your daddy." And I remember thinking, I don't know this man. He's always somewhere else. Nathan, I was born in this world. River Oaks, private schools, country clubs. I had everything and I've never belonged, not before the accident and not after. The chair just made the outside match the inside. He paused. But you know what I've learned in 3 years of sitting still while the world walks past? The world doesn't decide who belongs. You decide. You walk in, you stay, and eventually the room rearranges itself around you. But you have to stay, Lena. You have to stay. What if I can't? You can. You stayed at McDonald's for 3 years when you should have been in college. You stayed with Diego when it would have been easier to leave. You stayed on that porch talking to a stranger in a wheelchair when any sane person would have gone back to wiping tables. I'm scared, she said. I know, Nathan said. Use it. The scared part is the part that's paying attention. Elena sat in the dark, holding the phone, wearing the bracelet. Courage. Courage. Her mother's word for her. Nathan? Yeah? Don't hang up yet. I wasn't going to. They stayed on the line for another hour. Neither said much, but the silence was the light kind, the kind that only exists between people who've said exactly enough. Month 6, the annual shareholder meeting. 300 people in a mahogany-paneled ballroom. Institutional investors, board members, executives, legal counsel. Garrett opened the proceedings, composed, authoritative, magnificent. He presented the will challenge with smooth efficiency, medical records, expert testimony, a timeline of diminished capacity. Several board members nodded. Then Elena walked in. She wore a navy suit, the first she'd ever owned. She carried a brown paper bag, the kind McDonald's uses for takeout. 300 people looked at her and decided she didn't belong. Elena could feel it, the skepticism, the condescension. She set the brown paper bag on the podium. 6 months ago, I made $11.50 an hour at a McDonald's in Amarillo, Texas. I worked the overnight shift because it paid an extra $1.25. I gave my paychecks to my father for his medical bills. I ate 1 free meal per shift and called it dinner. The room went quiet, not respectful quiet, uncomfortable quiet. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I've learned enough in 6 months to run a $4 billion company. I haven't. But I'm going to tell you what I did find. She opened the bag, a thick stack of documents. For the past 5 years, Callaway Petroleum has been paying Sovereign Logistics 18% above market rate for crude oil transportation. 37 contracts, $38 million in overpayments. She paused. Sovereign Logistics is registered to a strip mall in Midland. Its principal shareholder is Victoria Shaw, Garrett Shaw's wife. The silence changed quality. The room rearranged its assumptions. Garrett stood. This is absurd. This woman has been here 6 months. She has no qualifications to interpret. Mr. Shaw? Elena's voice cut across his, not louder, sharper. You told me 6 months ago that all I know is how to make hamburgers. You were right. I know how to make hamburgers. I also know how to read receipts, check what comes in against what goes out, and spot when someone's taking what isn't theirs. She looked at the room. When you live on $400 a week and every cent has a name, you notice immediately when a penny goes missing. That's not something you learn at business school. That's something you learn at a cash register at 2 a.m. Garrett stepped forward, his face flushed. You have no right. You're nothing but a what? Elena said, calm, quiet. A McDonald's girl? Say it, Mr. Shaw. Say it in front of 300 shareholders and see how it sounds. He didn't finish the sentence. The room watched a man run out of words and realized they'd been watching the wrong person this whole time. A board member named Catherine Aldridge, 70, 30 years on the board, leaned forward. Miss Reyes, how did you find this? I grew up counting every dollar my family had. You learn to notice when numbers don't add up. Aldridge turned to the room. I move for an immediate vote on Mr. Shaw's removal. Elena turned back to the board. Richard Callaway didn't leave me this company because I know about oil. He left it to me because he believed the person who gives away their last meal will never take what isn't theirs. She paused. He was right, and the proof is in this bag. She looked around the room, 300 faces. Some hostile, some curious, a few, very few, with something that might have been respect. I know what most of you are thinking, Elena said. You're thinking she's 22. She has no degree. She doesn't know the difference between crude and refined, and she has no business standing behind this podium. And you're right, 6 months ago, I had no business being here. She held up the brown paper bag. But 6 months ago, a man in a wheelchair sat outside my restaurant at 2 a.m. with no money and no one in the world who cared whether he ate or starved. I gave him what I had, not because I'm generous. I'm not, I'm broke. I gave it to him because my mother taught me that you don't walk past hungry people. Not at 2 a.m., not ever. She set the bag down. Richard Calloway built this company from nothing. He understood what nothing feels like. And he knew that the person who remembers nothing, who never forgets what it's like to count every dollar, to skip meals, to lie awake wondering how to pay for medicine, that person will protect what he built better than anyone who's never had to worry about losing it. Catherine Aldridge leaned back in her chair. She looked at Elena for a long moment. Then she said to no one in particular, I've been on this board for 30 years. I've heard a lot of speeches. That's the first one I believed. The vote was called within the hour. Garrett Shaw was removed. The will challenge was withdrawn. The forensic audit of Sovereign Logistics was initiated that afternoon. And Elena Reyes, employee number 742, former overnight McDonald's worker, daughter of Lucia Reyes and Richard Calloway, raised by Diego Reyes on Delmar Street, became the controlling shareholder of Calloway Petroleum. She didn't celebrate. She found a quiet hallway, sat on the floor the way she'd sat in stairwells for 6 months, and called Diego. How'd it go, mija? I think Mama would have been proud. A pause, then Diego's voice, thick with something he wouldn't name. She always was, mija, she always was. Elena hung up. She sat in the hallway for 5 more minutes. People walked past, executives, lawyers, assistants, and for the first time in 6 months, some of them looked at her, not through her, at her. A few nodded. One woman from the legal department stopped and said simply, good job in there. Elena thanked her. Then she stood up, smoothed her navy suit, the first suit she'd ever owned, bought with money she'd earned at $11.50 an hour, and walked back into the boardroom to begin the work her father had trusted her to do. Not Richard, not the man who'd written the will. The other father, the one on the porch, the one who'd said, I believe in you, at midnight, without knowing what EBITDA meant. Because belief doesn't require a vocabulary, it requires showing up. 1 week later, Amarillo, the house on Delmar Street. Elena sat on the porch with Diego, drinking instant coffee. Same chippy mugs, same plastic chair. Warm Texas morning. A car pulled up. Not a sedan, not a limo, a regular car. The door opened. Nathan stepped out. Not rolled, not wheeled, stepped. His left hand gripped the car door. His legs shook. He wore jeans and a white shirt and an expression of such concentrated determination that Elena's throat closed before she understood why. He let go of the door. First step, unsteady. Second step, worse. Third step, Elena was on her feet, hand over her mouth, tears falling. But she didn't run to him. She didn't reach out because she knew the way you know someone when you've spent months learning the landscape of their pride, that he needed to do this alone. 4, 5, 6, 7. His foot caught a crack in the pavement. He staggered. Elena's hands shot forward. She pulled it back. Nathan steadied himself. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs, breathing hard, shaking from effort and emotion and the terror of wanting something so badly that failure becomes unbearable. Diego stood up from his plastic chair. His bad back, his stiff legs, none of it mattered. He stood because a man was standing who shouldn't have been able to. And some things deserve to be witnessed on your feet. I've been doing physical therapy for 5 months, Nathan said. The doctor said 15% chance. But I figured if a woman can give away her last meal to a stranger at 2 a.m., I can walk 12 steps. He reached into his pocket, a small box. Inside, a silver bracelet, new and polished, engraved with 2 letters, C and L, Courage and Lena. I'm not asking you to marry Nathan Calloway, he said. I'm not asking you to marry an oil company or a trust fund or a last name. I'm asking you to marry Nathan, the man you fed at 2 a.m. when the world was asleep and nobody was watching. The man who spent 2 weeks in a corner booth because he couldn't make himself leave. The man who learned to walk again because you showed him that giving up was a choice and he didn't want to make it anymore. Elena looked at him, at the 12 steps behind him, at the bracelet that joined her mother's word to her name. "Yes," she said through tears, "but you should know I'm still working the overnight shift whenever I'm home." Nathan laughed. A real laugh. The one she'd first heard in a McDonald's booth at 2 a.m. when he'd stopped being surprised that he still could. "I know, and I'll be the guy in the corner booth waiting." Elena stepped down from the porch. She took Nathan's face in her hands. Hands that had mopped floors and wiped counters and carried trays and written notes on napkins and held audit reports and shaken the hands of people who didn't think she was worth shaking hands with, and kissed him. 12 steps. Not a marathon, not a board meeting, not a $4 billion company. 12 steps across a cracked driveway in Amarillo, Texas, taken by a man who'd been told by doctors he had an 85% chance of never walking again. For a woman who'd given him her last meal when she didn't know his name. That was the story. Not the oil, not the will, not Garrett Shaw or Sovereign Logistics or the forensic audit. The story was 12 steps and a bracelet and a napkin that said, "Nobody should be hungry at 2 a.m. Behind them, Diego leaned against the doorframe, tears running down a face carved by work and loss and the kind of love that asked for nothing. He smiled, the first real smile since Lucia died, and whispered something into the warm Texas morning that no one heard but the woman who'd loved him enough to choose him, and who Elena believed was still close enough to listen. 6 months later, Elena ran Callaway Petroleum from Houston, but flew to Amarillo every month to sit on Diego's porch and drink instant coffee she could now afford to replace, but never did. Some things aren't improved by money. They're improved by showing up. Diego's back was better. Elena had flown in a specialist from Dallas. He still sat on the porch every morning, still drank instant coffee, but on good days he'd walk to the end of Delmar Street and back, just to prove he could. She established the Lucia Reyes Foundation, scholarships for young women forced to leave school for their families, full tuition, no conditions. Every acceptance letter signed in her handwriting because she remembered what it felt like to receive good news with a human being behind it instead of an institution. The first class included a 19-year-old single mother from Lubbock, working 2 jobs to pay for her sister's insulin. Elena interviewed her personally. She didn't ask about grades. Nathan walked with a cane. The limp was permanent, but he walked. He ran the company's charitable arm, building free clinics along Route 66, the same road he traveled when he was trying to disappear. Each bore a plaque. For the ones the road forgot. First year, 11,000 patients. None turned away. Garrett Shaw was indicted on 37 counts, convicted on 34. Elena didn't attend the trial. She sent Ray Gutierrez instead a case of good coffee with a note. "Thanks for the notebook." Patricia Kwan was promoted to VP. On her first day, she found a card on her desk. "You were the first person who told me I was getting better. That mattered more than you know." The McDonald's on Route 66 stayed open 24 hours. Once a month, Elena put on her old uniform and worked the overnight shift. Marcus still cooked with his headphones on. Every shift, she left a meal on the corner booth. Big Mac, extra fries, Coke, with a napkin that read, "Nobody should be hungry at 2 a.m. Sometimes the meal was still there in the morning, untouched. Sometimes it was gone and Elena never knew who took it. She didn't need to know. That was the point. You don't give because you want to see what happens. You give because someone is hungry and you have food, and the rest is just arithmetic. Lucia would have understood. Diego did understand. Nathan, who had once been the stranger at the table, understood most of all. Outside in the parking lot, a Range Rover and a Mercedes G-Wagon. But this time, everyone knew who they belonged to. And inside, at the corner booth, Nathan sat with his cane and a coffee he wasn't drinking, watching the woman he loved serve strangers through the small hours, understanding finally that some people don't change the world by building empires. They change it one meal at a time, one napkin at a time, one 2 a.m. at a time. And somewhere on a shelf in a house on Delmar Street, a metal box sat open, its secrets given, its purpose fulfilled. Beside it, a photograph of a young woman laughing in the Texas sun, in a bracelet engraved with a letter that didn't stand for a family name or a fortune or a company that pulled oil from the earth. It stood for courage, and courage, Elena had learned, is not the absence of fear. It is a Big Mac and fries in a note written on a napkin at 2 a.m., offered to a stranger by a woman who had nothing to give except the one thing that mattered, herself. Thank you for watching to the very end. If this story moved you, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new, even more emotional story every day.